Hi everyone. I want to talk about the new Pope for sure. But before I get into that, just a quick word on the VE Day commemorations because I was talking yesterday around the poignancy of the Ukraine war today. Another thing worth bearing in mind, I didn't really mention it in the video, but I think it's worth mentioning, is that in World War II, Ukraine paid an enormous price and was actually hammered by both sides. They suffered Nazi atrocities. One of the worst was Babi Yar massacre. Um, Massacres actually, there was more than one in Babi Yar ravine, but also from the Soviet side. In fact, in 1941, when the Soviets were moving out, there was an infamous series of atrocities called the NKVD prisoner massacres, in which retreating Soviets killed upwards of 100,000 people. They blamed it on the Germans. It actually turned out to be the Soviets, a little bit like the Catherine Wood massacre against the Poles. So Ukraine, like Poland and Belarus, was absolutely hammered in that war. Millions of Ukrainians fought and died for the Red Army. It's no exaggeration to say millions. Soviet casualties overall are estimated at about 27 million, which accounts for almost half of all deaths in World War II. It's a staggering toll, and many of them were indeed Ukrainian because Ukraine was a big center of population in the Soviet Union. So we shouldn't forget that it isn't just that there's a struggle today; they also struggled in World War II. So Ukrainians are remembering this as well. Um, Now to talk about the main subject of the video, Pope Leo XIV, Robert Prevost. It's for me, it was an interesting way that I found out because I was at my local church for a commemoration service for VE Day. It's an Anglican church. Our minister actually said that they'd heard there was white smoke from the Vatican. This was during the readings, like announcements, but she didn't know who the new pope was. And after the service, I overheard there's quite a few interesting people there. My local MP was there. There was a nun, an Irish nun that my father used to know. She's getting on now. I'd say she's in her 80s, but I overheard her saying Leo XIV, and I couldn't help myself. I rather abruptly interrupted, and I said, "What? They've got his name already?" And then she said he was an American, and I was stunned. I mean, the conventional wisdom has always been because the United States is a superpower, it can't be a superpower and have a pope at the same time. A bit like the same reason why there wouldn't be an American UN Secretary General, for instance. But here we have it. Um, Robert Francis Prevost was born in Chicago. He does share Peruvian nationality. He has Peruvian citizenship as well. So it's just as much a thing for Peruvians. There was big celebrations in Lima. Um, Huge response in Rome. That famous moment, Habemus Papam, we have a pope, and I like the way they do it in Latin, and then people kind of work out who is that. Um, and I'd never heard of him. I must admit, even among the American I knew was Kevin, I believe his name was Kevin Farrell, who was the Camerlengo. The Camerlengo is not excluded from papal election, but I mean, this again reiterates that often the predictions on conclaves are just wrong, at least in the British coverage. I don't know, maybe it was different in the United States, but in the British coverage, there've been names like Tagle, the Filipino, Italians, Pizzaballa, Zuppi, um, and even some of the Africans, but the Americans weren't even mentioned, so it wasn't like even considered. Um, Obviously, Cardinals are going to keep it close as to who they vote for, understandably, but it's historic. So he's the first American Pope. He's the second from the Americas. I don't know if he's the first Augustinian or not, from the Augustinian order. Probably not. But so far, I'm cautiously optimistic because I'm not a Catholic, but I said in my previous videos on this subject, I believe strongly that the Pontiff, the head of the Catholic Church, has to focus on compassion. That has to, if the church cannot be about compassion, then everything else, frankly, becomes not irrelevant, but compassion really does have to be at the heart of the church's teachings because that was at the heart of Jesus' ministry. So that's, to me, it's a no-brainer. Um, People are saying he is a follower of Francis. He was made a cardinal by Francis. Um, Obviously, he's his own man. He won't be exactly like Francis. So, for example, he wore some of the papal robe that Francis didn't wear. There's going to be a few things that are different, but I am encouraged by the fact that he's following in the theocracy of Francis, broadly speaking. And one of the first things he's done in the speech was to praise Francis. I mean, there'll be people that will say, I know there's Catholics, I've seen this online, coming out with some real hyperbole saying the Pope hasn't been Catholic for 50 years. And, it's now even goes so far as to say it's now in the hands of the Antichrist. It just, because I think, though, they really are quite a small minority. These ultra conservative Catholics. I don't think I think most Catholics are not that conservative. Um, Now, liberals who are expecting Leo XIV to be okay with women priests or suddenly change the church's views on abortion or anything like that are going to be disappointed. I don't think he's going to do that. I'm not sure any pope will actually. Unless there's really a radical schism, I don't think that will happen. But the fact that he's criticized Trump and Vance on migration policies is a good thing for the reason that it shows just because he's an American doesn't mean that he's afraid to speak out against Donald Trump. To me, that's very important. You know, the Pope isn't just a spiritual leader, they're effectively the figurehead, the spiritual figurehead for 1.4 billion people. It's no small thing. It is by definition one of the most powerful jobs in the world, one of the most powerful positions in the world. And, the Pope is obviously a faith leader, but there's politics there as well. I mean, today he'll be appointing a cabinet. Um, the Vatican punches well above its weight. It's the smallest country in the world, but if you look at the number of flags that were there in St. Peter's Square, the the influence far exceeds the size of the Holy See. Um, and even I, as an Anglican, have a very significant amount of interest in this. I mean, I come from a Northern Ireland Protestant background, and I'm fascinated by it. I will say this, just in passing. Oh, by the way, the Augustinians, apparently Augustine of Hippo, influenced Protestant theologians, including Martin Luther. So that's interesting. Might indicate he'll be good on ecumenical matters. But um, I mean, really, he is unknown. Let's be honest about it. Who knows what his papacy is going to be like? Whether he's going to be a strong pope or not a great pope, we don't know. So far, I'm encouraged because the Augustinians, to my understanding, they do focus a bit like the Franciscans. There is a focus there on humility and caring for the poor. The fact that he was a missionary for years, that is not a glamorous position. He will have worked with some very poor people. So I can't imagine a situation where he really distances himself from that. You know, I think had the church gone for, I think if this conclave had gone from for a really conservative figure, someone like Sarah, the Guinean, or Erdo, the Hungarian, it would have been a big mistake. I think it would have polarized a lot of people. Devout Catholics would have obviously welcomed it and wished him all the best. But I mean, this isn't about converting people to Catholicism, but it's about saying the church is relevant and there is a message here in a world that has the likes of Putin, Xi Jinping, and Donald Trump. I think it's important to have a leader who focuses on compassion. And if that cannot be from the head of the church, then who's it going to be from? So I think that's very important. So I'm cautiously optimistic. Um, we'll see what his papacy's like. He's 69. He seems to be in pretty good health, so he could have quite a long papacy. John Paul II was only in his 50s, so I doubt it'll be as long as that. But I don't know. Could be a generation. Could be 10, 15 years. I'm still just getting my head around American Pope. It was something that was never really taken seriously. And yet, why not? The United States has a sizable Catholic minority. There are plenty of American cardinals, so why not? Um, and yes, he's American. He's from Chicago, but he has that background in Peru as well. So he's international in that sense. Um, So it's it's just as much a thing for Peruvians as it is for Americans. Um, Time will tell, but I think that you know even as a non-Catholic, I think putting compassion at the heart of the papacy is extremely important. That is much more important than whether or not devotees can receive communion. Now he is going to have a lot on his plate. The Catholic abuse scandal that is not going to go away. I watched the film Philomena the other night with Judy Dench and Steve Coogan. Now, of course, there's some artistic license. If you've seen the film, it's basically about a woman who, as a teenager, was sent into one of the notorious state-sanctioned Catholic, I don't know what you would call them, homes for young unmarried women, and the children were basically, it was like the forced adoption thing where the children were taken away from the mothers. It was appalling, absolutely appalling. Um, Now, with any film, you have to take a degree of caution with that, but it has to be said the church has done some pretty shocking things. The Catholic Church has got a lot of skeletons. And yes, it's true that it's the world's biggest non-governmental provider of healthcare. It's true that Catholics, Catholic priests, Catholic missionaries around the world do some very good work with the poor and the dispossessed. Um, and some modern popes have been some of the most inspiring people in modern history, in my view. But the church does have a lot of skeletons. And it's not good enough to say that, this priest has been accused of this serious sexual misconduct. We'll just move him to another parish. Church has to unequivocally say these are crimes. These people are committing crimes. They should be punished. Um, and it's not just, I think there has been some attempts to address it by Benedict XVI and Francis. Leo XIV is going to have to deal with this, but it isn't going to go away because the scale was so big that the wounds run very, very deep. Apologies aren't enough. There has to be action. Um, so that's going to be a big, big thing. There's going to be issues like, for example, I know in Francis's term there was issues about getting more priests into remote areas and then maybe relaxing the rules, for example, on celibacy. I do think that the church is going to have to be realistic. My message to ultra conservative Catholics, with the greatest of respect, do you want the church to be relevant or do you want to be dogmatic? Now, if you want to be dogmatic and strict to what you would interpret as true Catholic doctrine, okay, but that is going to reduce the church's influence. Um, if you want to be realistic and have the sort of Church of Francis and perhaps Leo XIV, a church that is widely respected, that is going to have a reach well beyond Catholics, then this is a good direction. Um, but there has to be compassion at the heart of that. I wouldn't be so arrogant as to tell, I'm not a Catholic. I can't tell Catholics what to believe. But sometimes I do think it can appear cold and stuffy, not allowing divorcees to get communion, um, shaming people who've had sex before marriage, this sort of thing. It's the church needs to recognize in the modern world that sort of stuff just seems stuffy and archaic. Other institutions have had to change. The monarchy, which is also an ancient institution, had to change in the mid 20th century. They had some very stuffy protocols, not allowing divorced people to be in the presence, that sort of thing. It was that had to change, and I think the Holy See is going to have to change in some regards. But I actually agree with not changing too much. I wouldn't want the church to suddenly be revolutionary and extremely left wing to the point of being beyond recognition. I wouldn't even want to see that. I mean, there has to be certain preservation. I think preserving customs and traditions is a very good thing. I believe it's part of human culture. And I wouldn't want to see a situation where technology and materialism and the human world overtook traditions zeitgeist overtook traditions to the point where it's unrecognizable. I think that would be profoundly sad. It's the one reason I'm a supporter of the monarchy as well. Tradition does not mean a bad thing. The only time I think tradition should really change is if it interferes with human rights or animal welfare, or it's just so archaic that it's just utterly out of touch. But look at those crowds in St. Peter's Square. They love it. They love the ceremony, they love the tradition, they love the mystique of it. I, as a non-Catholic, find that fascinating. So one more thing about why I do not miss Northern Ireland. You know, some loyalist marching bands on the day of the Pope's funeral, just singing anti-Catholic slogans. It's so boring and so small-minded. And there's nationalists who are small-minded as well about Protestants. It's just there's just a pettiness to Northern Ireland, just a colloquialism, a sort of not colloquialism, a parochialism, a just petty mindedness. I'm thinking you people, I'm talking about unionists and nationalists, need to get out into the world. It's just, and they'll realize, I'm not saying get rid of the traditions. I know there's a Sinn Féin politician recently mentioned that unionist traditions have to be respected in a united Ireland. And I appreciate that. I think that is important. If there is ever a united Ireland, and it's a possibility in my lifetime, nationals cannot just pretend that that British culture, that unionist culture, arrived yesterday. They have to respect it. But unionists also have to. I find some unionists are just petty minded, and I do think there's an anti Catholic bigotry there. Although, to be fair, in the Republic, there has historically been some anti Protestant bigotry. It works both ways. But it's just, hey, and it's just, people need to move on. Um, So that's my thoughts. I won't say too much more because we're literally one day into this papacy, but it's going to be, I think if Leo XIV follows in a doctrine broadly similar to Francis, if he's a reformer, if he's prepared to take on those taboo subjects honestly, um, if he emphasizes compassion, I think that can be a good thing. That incidentally means sometimes having to stick his neck out. Um, Provoke politicians. If it means criticizing Putin, if it means criticizing Israeli aggression in Gaza, that sort of thing, then I'm all for that. Because if the spiritual leader, 1.4 billion people, cannot sometimes be a little bit controversial and speak out, then it's kind of just a ceremonial position, and I don't think it should be actually. Let me know your thoughts.